Thanks for the unreal introduction. My name's Luke, as mentioned. I'm the General Manager at MarketEase digital marketing agency here in Adelaide. And to my left is Rohan, our Principal Data Scientist. And together we oversee a team who collectively manage 8 figures in annual marketing spend across multiple industries. This is probably helpful. That's us. I've got a funny story about these 2 images, but I'll explain it at the end. And today, I guess what we really want to talk about is marketing decision making, but in these 4 key areas, centering it on planning, collecting the right data, advertising, and also making optimizations. And realistically, each of these topics could be its own presentation, so if you have questions, we'll be around at the end. Feel free to contact us. Cool, but I want to start with planning. And as you listen to many speakers today and research advertising, as I'm sure you all do in your field, you would come across this battle of where to put your budget. Should you invest in the red side, which is performance-based, short-term marketing, efficiency, return on ad spend? Or should you invest on the blue side, brand awareness, reaching category buyers, building useful associations and memory, and improving your mental availability? And in this discussion, or in the answer to where you should invest your budget, unfortunately the answer is it depends. But I'm going to give you some useful tips and frameworks to help you understand for your business what might be the best combination. And a good way to think about this is through research done from from What Advertising Research Center, called the resource with the growth efficiency ceiling. And John Dawes from the EBI also speaks about this point that basically in any market, a small portion of your buyers are actually looking to buy now, and a larger portion of them could buy, but in the future. So for example, if I recently bought toothpaste, no creative ad is going to make me buy more. And if my marketing agency bought a complex telephone system, then we may buy one again in years' time, but we are not going to buy one now. So with this though, it's also known that the greatest uplift in reach is when you make an exposure go from 0 to 1, because that means people know you exist now. Whereas before, if they've never heard of you before or have never seen any advertisements, then they cannot buy from you. And so there are certainly benefits if you are a large company. I think OTR was an example used in the previous presentation. There's certainly benefits for you to reach as many people as you can because you have the budget to do so, and you're increasing those exposures from 0 to 1, which has that greatest return. But we also work with a lot of SMEs who don't have that marketing budget. They can't actually afford to reach everyone in the category, and so they're looking to come to us to find ways to spend their money more efficiently. And so what we suggest for companies in that instance is what you can do is, in the short term, invest budget reaching those people who are actually looking for your solution now. If I own a home and I'm looking for someone to treat termites, well, I'm going to search for that now, and I need someone to solve that problem for me now. If I'm a company, if I'm a pest removalist company, it makes sense for me to prioritizing reaching these people if my budget is fixed. However, if I was a larger pest control company or an OTR or a company that actually had quite a large budget, then it may make sense for me to not only reach people searching those terms, but reach people who are planning to buy a new home, who will eventually consider termites as an issue, but just not now. And with this, if you were to only focus spend reaching those who are currently looking for your solution, your growth would be stalled. You would only be reaching this smaller portion of the market. And yes, you would get short-term financial value that you could invest into future advertising, but you would not grow sustainably. In fact, you would reach a ceiling. And so what we suggest when we work with companies, this is situation specific. I understand that you probably can't read all of the little pieces of text in the map or illustration, but the key thing that we do when we work with companies is, in the x-axis, is we just look at, for your business, where does your audience exist? Which marketing platforms can you reach them on? And we document those. So in this instance, core platforms such as Meta, LinkedIn, Google, potentially you've got an email list that you can use as well. And then in the y-axis, there's 5 elements there, but all you really need to think is, okay, in these platforms where our audience exists, are there ways that I can segment them into those who I know are currently looking for my solution and those who may in the future? And so if you were to run a Google search campaign, for example, there would be people literally searching for your solution now that you could prioritize first if your budget was fixed. But knowing that to grow in the long term, you do need to reach more people, you could then consider reaching those future demand quadrants with push advertisements through social platforms. Those were some of the key frameworks, or at least consideration points, when we're planning spend for a company. What Rohan's going to do now is discuss the importance of planning, not only for marketing, but also in the context of collecting the right data.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So when it comes to a data analytics framework, a standard data analytics framework would tell you to start with the data first. So determine what data is available, what could be done with that data, then analyze the data, build models, and then they talk about decisions. So define what decisions does this data support. But what we suggest is, while planning for data, don't start with data. So instead of finding a purpose for your data, find data for a purpose. And what I mean by that is start with defining what the problem is, start with defining what the decision is that's going to be made in the future, and then go to the data. And that typically involves understanding business problems, understanding questions that the business is trying to solve, understanding the audience. That itself might be a question, who's the target audience, and understanding objectives. Now, a useful framework that we use for this is called IWIK, or I Wish I Knew. And it's pretty simple. It's just asking yourself a simple question: what do you wish you knew to make the best decision possible? So some examples could be, I wish I knew who my target audience is, or I wish I knew who my most loyal customers are. I wish I knew if a customer has bought a particular product, what is the next product that I should recommend to that customer. Once you've started collecting these statements, you put them in a database or in a spreadsheet, and then you assess if you have data or not to address these statements. For some cases, you might have data already. Some cases, maybe you're not sure, or you're absolutely sure that you don't have data. And also judge them based on whether they're urgent or not. After having done that, after having collected all of these statements, this 2x2 knowledge matrix can help you prioritize these statements. So the top half there is the important part. At the top left, you have data that you have today, statements where you have data, and statements that are also important for you tomorrow. This is foundational information for your business and should be maintained, and you should keep collecting this data. Next to it, on the top right, you have statements where you don't have data but are important in the future. Now, this is the data that needs to be collected at this stage. This is the missing information that will help you solve pressing problems in the business or make decisions down the line. Like I said, everything at the bottom is either meaningless information that should be stopped collecting or random information that it doesn't make sense to collect in the first place. Now, this is an example of a client where the I wish I knew statement was how to target my audience, or how to be more granular in our targeting. The audience in this case was a very specific audience. People who use this client's products belong to those 3 dwelling types. So essentially, separate houses, row houses, townhouses. Everyone who lived in buildings or apartments could not use this product. And obviously the client was aware of this, but they had a very broad targeting mechanism in place, but they didn't know how to exactly send more ads to those particular, to that particular target audience. So what they were doing, essentially, this is an example of Sydney and surrounding suburbs. They were just ignoring the CBD areas and sending out ads equally across all other areas, which is fine. As you can see, there are some postcodes there. So before that, I'll explain what this graph is. This graph, we then analyze external data to find out what percentage of people living in a particular postcode belong to that target audience that I spoke about earlier. After having analyzed that data, you can now divide it by postcodes and see that it's not just about CBDs or non-CBD areas. There are also certain areas in the middle and some areas where nearly 91% of the population belongs to that target audience. So at an early stage, because we asked the right question and we realized we didn't have data to answer that question, we went and collected that data. And then down the line, when it came to strategizing or designing our strategy for marketing campaigns, this data was very helpful. We spoke about planning for data, but what's also important is collecting and measuring not just more data, but also the right kind of data. And Luke is going to expand further on this.
I love this illustration because it's a classic dashboard that I see from businesses that we work with or other agencies that have worked with a client that we then begin to work with afterwards. And it's a good one because there is some information here that could be, well, it is considered useful, but if I'm your boss or if I'm the client in working with you and I ask you a question, thanks for sharing me this dashboard, but are results actually good? And should I give you more marketing budget? It's really funny because if you just look at this information alone, you would either be like me and say, maybe the results are good. I see that, things are happening, we're getting conversions, there's a cost per acquisition there. If you're a bit more clever than me, you might use the performance relative to previous years and periods as a base to say, yeah, look, conversions are up 40.6%, 40.6. That's pretty good. Yeah, give us more budget, things are going well. But it's interesting because if you look at information you need to know, at this stage, hopefully, you understand the revenue that your ads are generating, or at least the lead pipeline value that your ads are generating. But then you probably also know your client acquisition cost as well. And that's essentially your cost per lead divided by lead conversion rate. And this is information that most advertisers know, but you don't actually know if what you're doing is profitable. Is a cost per acquisition or a client acquisition cost of, say, $60, is that actually a good thing? Is your company making profit per sale at that rate? And at this stage, with that dashboard, you don't actually know. You just know things are working in a direction. What you really need is an understanding of the variable costs that are associated with a sale. So what are the costs of goods sold if you're selling a product? SG&A just basically means what are the administrative costs to service that sale as well? And what net profit does that leave you with per sale? Is that actually a margin of, in this instance with simple numbers, 10%? Is that actually sustainable for your business? Is that what you want to work towards? Maybe your client will say, actually, we don't need net profit on first sale, we just want to break even. What that would mean is your target client acquisition cost, instead of it being set at 15, you would have scope to make it now $25 because you're taking that $10 net profit per sale and investing it in client acquisition. And the reason that's really important is because instead of speaking with your boss or client or whoever and asking for more marketing budget, in reality, you don't need a set marketing budget. You just need to know how much you can spend to acquire a customer profitably. If at every sale I'm acquiring a client $10 profit per sale because I'm spending $15 to acquire a client, then why would a client or my boss give me $10,000 budget? Why wouldn't they give me $50,000 or $80,000, assuming that I can continue to acquire clients within that set acquisition cost? And so the key point here I just wanted to say is it's really important to not just know your marketing metrics, but also your financial business metrics as well, because that will allow you to ultimately scale your business. Now, we work with some not-for-profit companies as well who don't necessarily care about profit per sale, and what they're interested more is their increase in awareness. And to be honest, the correct way to measure your awareness is probably to contract a marketing research institute. If you don't have the budget to do that, this way is cutting corners, and it is affordable because it's free. And what I've essentially done is, in this analysis for landscape supplier companies, is looked at the total branded search volume of each brand within the competitor set, which, according to the World Advertising Research Centre, is a decent proxy for a company's performance relative to its competitors. So in the y-axis, I've looked at total volume, how many people are searching for each brand for the month of June 2024. And in the x-axis at the bottom, how has that increased over time? Are there competitors growing at a faster rate than you who are also bigger than you? And if that's true, well, what are they doing? If you are in the red and you see competitors in the green that are consistently growing at 200 to 300%, surely they're doing something that you're not. And it's not necessarily news to anyone in this room, but the common recurring reason as to why a company is green and why one is red is how much they're investing in advertising. Tell that to your boss. And then this is just a quick little fun one that I thought I'd add as well. So with SA Power Networks, for example, they just wanted to measure awareness uplift for an event or a activity that they're trying to promote to the community. And so an easier way, affordable way to do this is actually to use meta poll ads. And what that is basically you ask a question before you run a campaign. You then run the campaign to hopefully improve the awareness of whatever message you're trying to convey. It could be educational, it could be a product release or a new store. And then you run a poll ad at the end to measure any uplift. And that's a pretty quick and easy way to gauge whether what you're doing is working without necessarily investing big dollars in marketing research. And again, knowing that collecting the right data is important, I've given you several key metrics you should consider. Variable costs, wanting to know profit per sale, potentially some share of branded search as well. Rohan is going to provide more recommendations about the correct data that you could be collecting for your business.
Yeah, to get a better understanding of your business, including the financial metrics that Luke just mentioned, it's important to dive deep into the internal data. But before you do that, it's important to conduct a data audit. So in the previous planning stage, I mentioned that there could be data that you're already collecting, and that's important for the future as well. But most businesses look like this. So when it comes to the data that they collect, there will be variables across multiple data sets that are not complete, and there's missing information. And that doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when, in the previous stage, if you identified that variable as being important for the future. So going back to that stage and then coming back here and identifying the ones where you're not having enough data and prioritizing the ones where you need to start collecting that data. So that's a data audit. Putting it all together is what we had in the beginning, a data-based analytics framework. We now moved to a decision-driven framework where the decision and the problem is the focus point. You start with framing that decision with the IWIK framework that I mentioned. You conduct the data audit that I mentioned in the previous slide, start collecting data, build models, analyze data, and then you arrive at the decision. And you notice that I've also put experience and intuition, which are not necessarily data-based senses, but we consider those to be, if not as important, sometimes more important, sometimes less important, depending on the context, but they are important. So it's important to not just make decisions based on data. It might sound contradictory for someone who works with data to say that, but it's important to also consider your experience and intuition and anything external that might be affecting the decision. A modern way to collect data is to use generative AI to improve data collection or data quality and to increase the amount of data you're collecting. So this is an example of a client who had other clients or their own clients, their customers, and they didn't have any industry data for that client, for those clients. So their "I wish I knew" statement was what industries do our clients belong to, and how are those industries affecting our performance. So what we did was we used simple GPT-based model and a prompt there to go and collect this data. And it's quite quick, and it's not even that expensive. But the one thing is, it's not 100% accurate. So it really depends on the input that you're providing. So garbage in, garbage out, the old adage. In our case here, for example, there's one client that's just mentioned as IRT. I don't know what IRT is. GPT doesn't know what IRT is. So you're probably not going to get an accurate answer there. So it's important that the quality of the data you're providing is good, and the quality of the prompt you're using is also good. But from our experience, this method is between 80 to 90% accurate at providing missing data. In some cases, especially if you have a lot of data, it's better to have 80 to 90% accurate data rather than having absolutely no insight into that area. And this is not just related to industry groups. You can do that for postcodes or any data point that's available publicly. So once you've collected all of this data, and once you started storing the data, it's time to integrate it. And Luke shared an example of a dashboard earlier using marketing data. This is a dashboard using internal data. You might not be able to see the numbers there, but at the top right, there's a section for industry analysis. And that is actually the same data that I shared in the previous slide, where we've joined it now with internal data. And now you can start measuring how performance and trends change between different industries. And this insight is something which we do for several clients, and they found it very valuable. Again, before generative AI, collecting this data, especially if you have a lot of customers, would have been painful, to say the least. Now that we collected data and measured data, it's time to create some ads and start advertising, and Luke is going to talk more about this part.
Cool. So you would have listened to many speakers. In fact, I know you have listened to many people talk about different ways to make creative, many concepts, many strategies, many best practices, and I'm not here to disagree with anyone. But all I wanted to do is in this next slide is show you a very simple way to think about an ad concept to help you get started in making something structured. So instead of being like this illustration with post-it notes everywhere and messy, what I aim to present is just this diagram to the left. Don't worry about anything else and whatever's cut off. And that's basically, when you're making an ad, it's basically a concept. You're trying to make a concept that is an advertisement. There are many complicated things that you can include at these three levels, but essentially it boils down to who are you advertising to, who's your audience, what are you offering them in the ad, and why are you offering them that offer, really? And so for a quick example just to illustrate this and why it's good to break things down simply to enhance creative testing is we work with, say, a business coach, and they wanted to communicate with SMEs in Australia. So the audience was SME business owners. What were they offering? They were offering a webinar, an educational webinar, and the angle or reason as to why someone should go to this webinar was that it was centered on helping business owners find and attract the right staff, really. So many frills and things you can include in an ad, but it really boiled down to those three things. And that works really well, but then what was seen is that over time, there was not only ad fatigue, but offer fatigue as well. Results were really good, and then they started to plateau a bit. So then as a team, we could look at many different variables, but we're like, okay, in these three key areas or components of an ad concept, what should we consider changing? Should we reach a different audience? No, actually, we still want to continue to reach SME business owners. The audience size isn't that big. Do we want, and the realities are, we could have said, you know what, finding and attracting the right staff is actually a really good angle that's relevant to most businesses. Maybe the webinar and what we were offering was the problem. Maybe instead of that, it actually should be a one-on-one consultation with the company. Maybe it should be a free resource that we're offering these people. However, if we were to say, actually, people are able to find good staff now, or that's done, maybe it is still a webinar that we are offering prospects, but instead of it being centered on recruitment, it could be centered on supporting business owners with focus or mental well-being. And that is just simply changing the angle. Again, I don't mean to overcomplicate things. There are many things that make a really good ad, but to help you get started and help you creative test, you can just boil it down to these 3 components and make an ad concept. Again, I don't want to throw too many things in, but emotion is important. There's good research that supports it. Other speakers have spoken about it as well. I'm not going to go through each one, but the key point from Karen Nelson-Field's research is that there are some really good positive emotions that elicit a high emotional response, and there are actually some negative emotions that elicit a higher emotional response as well. In your ads, with your angle specifically, try to evoke an emotion if you can. This was just an example, the same company, Animal Welfare League. To the left, to your right, is a sad cat that's not microchipped and lost. Poor cat, emotions are not the best seeing that one. To the right, happy dog going to boarding whilst you're going on a holiday. Company that is eliciting positive and negative emotional responses. Something I did want to share is just kind of like a quick little tip is I'm sure all of you know of Facebook Ads Library, LinkedIn Ads Library, Google Ads Transparency Center. Mind the name, but this tool called Foreplay is actually pretty good. It's a mood board of ads that marketers like yourselves have pinned and saved into the platform. So if you're struggling for creative inspiration, you can actually use this tool, search in your category, and see what other marketers have really enjoyed and liked. Great. So I've talked about an ad concept and that it's made of 3 key components: the offer, the angle, and the audience. Rohan is going to specifically talk about the audience component of an ad concept and explain how data science can really help you fine-tune who you're targeting.
Yeah, one way to get a better understanding of your customer base is to segment your customer base based on different metrics. Now, there are simple ways to do it. There are slightly more sophisticated ways to do it. This one here is just using a RFM modeling based on past purchase data to segment into different customer segments. But you can also use machine learning based on internal data again. The advantage of using an algorithm like this, which is a clustering algorithm, is it doesn't just consider past purchase data, but you can consider any other data points for which you're collecting data. So demographic data or website user behavior data, and input all of that into the model, and it can cluster data based into different customer segments. One application of that was for a plumbing business, where we identified 4 segments based on clustering again. The top one, for example, are bulk order plumbers who buy in bulk essentially. And the reason why we know that is we looked at basket sizes, and the clustering algorithm considered basket size as one of the metrics. Based on this, we devised marketing strategies, and you can also again create or build creative targeted for each of these customer segments. What we did with the image personas is we used Midjourney to build image personas. The most famous plumber I know is Mario, so that's why you see Mario there. But you could also use text data, so sentiment analysis based on customer reviews or any point where customers are talking about your company or your product. You can build a natural language processing model, or you can just use generative AI again to do this. Something that's very powerful is the ability to converse with these models and ask very specific questions. So in this example, I've asked what do customers in Sydney like or dislike about this particular brand. You can then compare what do customers in Adelaide dislike or like about this brand, and then start getting some deeper insights which probably wouldn't have been possible before. And then again, use this to inform your creative and marketing strategy. The next part of our four-stage framework is optimization or optimizing. One way of optimizing is looking in the rearview mirror. So looking at historical data, looking at descriptive statistics, and optimizing based on that. But what's much more powerful is to use that historical data to predict marketing outcomes or predict business outcomes, and use that foresight to optimize marketing campaigns. And yeah, Luke is going to talk more about this part.
Cheers. So this illustration was shared before, and we talked about how it's really important to know your variable costs per sale, and also why it's important to understand the net profit you're making as well. And not only does that arm you with more productive conversations with management and with clients, but this information actually allows you to be predictive as well. And I'll show you. So, Mike Rhodes in the top right corner, if you don't know about him, you should. He's made a really cool tool. I think it's free, maybe it's paid now, called Profit Max. And essentially what you do is you input those values that were in the previous slides. Cost, what's your cost per acquisition, how many leads you're making, what's your profit, basically, after a campaign's results. And what he essentially does with this tool is model your predicted performance in the future with these known performance measures. So in this instance, inputting it gave us this output, but I'll show you the cool illustration on the next slide. And what you essentially do is you press Profit Max, how much profit can I maximize with this campaign based off of the historic performance we're seeing, and it will project what it believes you could generate with these variables that you've input, knowing that advertising spend does reach inefficiency ceilings over time. It's able to model and predict how much revenue you actually will make based on those historic measures, which is really useful and really powerful if you're going into conversations with board, potentially looking to ask for more budget or justify spending more. Now, it's important to also understand limitations. No forecast is right, but some are useful. And in this forecast, there are known limitations, right? So this tool isn't going to consider seasonality. Maybe there are peak times of the year that you benefit from that are known that this model just won't be able to predict. But it's free. It's a really good way to start. However, as the theme of this conversation is gone, I've shown you a free forecasting tool that you can use with business measures, with those known business metrics, But Rohan is going to show you what else is possible if you have done the preemptive work to collect the right data for your business beyond those surface level measures.
Yeah, so what's possible is you can build your own machine learning algorithms. In the previous slide, we had something that was custom built, but this is something which we've built on our own. So the I wish I knew statement here was which marketing channel has the highest impact on lead volume. And on the vertical axis, you see different channels. I'm not sure if you can read that, but there's different marketing channels there. The different colors are blue for below the line, green for through the line, and orange for above the line. And what you'll notice is those numbers there are correlation coefficients, how strongly that marketing channel is correlated with lead volume. So at the very bottom is Performance Max. That's the most strongly correlated marketing channel. And if you just look at the graph overall, you'd see that below the line and through the line marketing channels have a greater impact on lead volume. They're more highly correlated with a growth in lead volume. So we use that data to build a predictive model based on multiple regression to predict the impact of increasing ad spend in each marketing channel. So what would be the impact of a $1,000 increase in ad spend in each of these based on historical performance? And as you see, there's some that the last column there shows the total weekly expected lead volume increase, and there's some that do better, some that do worse, and similar to that previous slide, Performance Max has the highest impact on lead volume increase. So then how do we use this data. We can use it to allocate budgets. So we didn't actually propose an increase in budget. The increase in budget to the existing budget was only $365, not much compared to the 18.4K weekly spend. But what we did was reallocate budget to the channels that we discussed earlier that were predicted to have a greater lead volume increase by increasing ad spend in those. And what we saw by giving that proposed budget was we estimated that lead volume would increase from 42 to 84, which is a 100% increase, just by reallocating and increasing budget by $365. All of this is good, but what is the outcome? This is lead volume, and we made that change in the vertical around the time where you see the vertical line. That was August of last year. We also made some other changes, so this wasn't the only change that was made, but after that, lead volume started to increase. It decreased again in December because of seasonality, but had increased again in February, and the overall lead volume increase was 93%. And like I mentioned earlier, there were other changes made as well, but this was one of the changes that we implemented. Another metric that is useful is customer lifetime value, and it's good to know this at a broad business level, but what's more powerful is to know this for every customer and predict this over the next 12 months, 24 months for every customer, because then this is also a way to segment customers. So that right table that you see there, probably can't read the metrics, but every customer has a predicted customer lifetime value and a probability of being alive, which sounds a bit dramatic, but essentially their churn rate. And so we've done that for every customer. So how do we use this then? Firstly, it's good to first see whether these predicted values are actually accurate or not. In some cases, like you see there, it was pretty accurate, almost a dollar difference for those first two ones. But these are only the accurate ones. But there were some where we saw that there was a customer predicted to have spent nearly $70,000 in 12 months, but hadn't spent anything at all. So the way we would use this is we don't know exactly why they didn't spend, but we could use this data to target them for using re-engagement campaigns, whether it's an email campaign, SMS campaign, whatever the case is. We've talked a lot about collecting data, and we've encouraged you to collect more data, but it's also important to bear in mind the ethics of data collection. There's 5 key principles that we like to use, starting with ownership. Get a clear understanding of who owns the data you're collecting. Typically, when it comes to private information about customers, customers own the data. Be transparent as well about what you're doing with the data. But if you're collecting website user behavior data, then have privacy policies and statements on the website. Most brands do this. But the last 3 are especially important. So privacy, one tip here is if you're building models and analyzing data, for the most part, you don't need personal data. So you don't need names, surnames, exact date of births, etc. So de-anonymizing the data or anonymizing the data or de-identifying the data is a good practice that we use as well. And then intentions and outcomes. I think most of us have good intentions when it comes to collecting data, but it's important to ask why you're collecting the data and what's the purpose of this collection. And you probably asked this question in the first stage, but it's important to keep reflecting on this and how you plan to use the data. You might have good intentions, but sometimes even with good intentions, the outcomes may not actually match those intentions, or the outcomes might be negative. One example is when Snapchat tried to market weight loss products to, and this was done based on their user data, and they marketed weight loss products to customers or users who they deemed to be most relevant. And the intention was good. It was to send a health-related product to people, but the outcome can be bad for people, for example, who have anorexia or eating disorders, who might, for example, not appreciate an ad about that. So it's important to bear in mind outcomes as well, not just intentions, and to consider what the potential outcome could be. So when it comes to improving marketing and in general business decision making using data, again, there's 4 parts to this. There's the planning part, collecting and measuring, advertising and optimizing. We have found success using this model, and our hope is that if you use this model, you would also find success. And Luke mentioned that we'll come back to this slide, but before that, I'd like to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. There's our email IDs as well. Have a chat with us after this as well. It's there.
Easy. Actually, if you want to know the context behind the slide, you can talk to me afterwards. With industry. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Rohan and Luke, everybody. Or as they told me before, the good-looking one and the smart one, and I'll leave it up to you to figure out which one's which. Actually, you're both better looking and smarter than me, I'm not going to lie.
Thank you.
I'm guessing both of you really love an Excel spreadsheet, and I've realized that's a really good way to separate marketers. So who in the room loves an Excel spreadsheet and data, and who in the room hates it? Who loves it first? And who hates it? There you go. That's a good way to split a room full of marketers.
Literally.
A couple of questions for you. Data can often be overlooked. If you're someone in a small team or working solo, how much time should be spent looking at this information as part of a decision-making process? And when's it worth looking at getting an agency like you guys involved?
It depends on how much data you're collecting. So if you're at that early stage where you just started collecting data and there's not a lot of data and you don't have a lot of customers, then you're probably not going to get insight about that data. But I would say the planning for data collection and planning for what data you will collect is important at every stage. Was there a second part to that question, or?
When do we look at getting an agency involved or outsourcing?
Yeah, if you have a lot of internal data, then our data science service dives deep into that data to help optimize your marketing campaigns. So if you're also running marketing campaigns, but if you want to dive deeper into internal data to optimize those campaigns, then that's when you would use an agency like us. Luke.
You were talking earlier about you were talking earlier about creating ads based on data, and earlier today we heard about the importance of creativity. Where's the balance between looking at data when making ads based on research and creativity and going on gut feel?
Yeah, I think something that is really valid is we've talked about collecting the right data throughout this presentation, but there is real value in intuition and experience as well. I think there certainly is a place where, if you're an experienced creative, you are more likely to make something that is a really good ad. You're more likely to do that than I am, someone with less creative experience. So I think for sure, if you're experienced in the industry, then you are going to see things that maybe the data won't show, or maybe another marketing professional may not see. So I think there's certainly a place for both. I mean, if there is obvious information you're seeing that would suggest an ad is or isn't working, then act on it. But in the preliminary testing phases, that's why we hire creatives and work with really smart creative people, because your intuition is worth a lot as well.
And just to add to that, the way I see data is it's like an added sense. So just like hearing, seeing, tasting, all of these are different senses, and not one isn't necessarily better than the other. So data, intuition, and qualitative information are 3 senses that a business would typically use. And having data is just having that additional sense. It may not be everything, but when you combine all the senses, it gives you another picture.
There's been a bit of a theme at Digital Adelaide this year about AI, and you briefly covered it, but what are some simple ways everyone in the room could get assistance from AI in this space? And are there some simple time-saving things that can be automated using AI or online tools?
I'm happy to start. The word was simple, so I think I can give some insight here. I think with AI, there's a lot of hype, like around the LLMs, like GPT, Gemini, whatever. And the truth is, they actually can make a lot of what you do more efficient. When the question was raised, like, who uses AI to help them with advertising, and no one put up their hand, if that's actually true, then I think that is not smart on your behalf. I think you actually should be using these tools especially in the creative process, to speed up the process of idea generation. But in saying that, efficiency alone isn't important. Like with Rohan's example, if in a spreadsheet, GPT can generate 100, 200, 300 responses in something, keyword research, ad copy, audience research, but there is a known margin of error as well. And how important is that margin of error in the work that you're doing? If you're writing ad copy in government, you can have no margin of error. So you can't really lean on tools like this. And I think conversely, if you're not, then you can be a bit more, lenient with the output that it gives you. But I think it's really important too, not to just look at the output and efficiencies that these models give you. I think the real importance too is what is the input you are giving the language model as well. And by input, I don't mean like buying a course from a prompt engineer and that allows you to write something cool that someone else wouldn't, but are you uploading databases of correct and incorrect examples of your desired output with reasoning as to why one is correct and one isn't correct? I think really understanding the importance of input when using an LLM is really important as well.
And just to add to that, so AI has been in the news recently, and that's largely because of generative AI, so the ChatGPT and those models. But AI has been around for a long time. So AI has been around, so the examples I shared using machine learning, that's technically AI as well. So there are easier forms of AI out there which are achievable for all of you.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Luke and Rohan, everybody. Little gift
Thank
for
you.
you guys from our sponsors.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks.